Welcome back. Week 37. Cannot believe it. First Sunday of Christmas. I am grateful that you are here and back to support what it is that we are doing. And I really appreciate those of you who have subscribed recently, those of you who have started sharing the videos. I really appreciate it. This is a word that I personally believe needs to get out, and I appreciate that you have come along on that journey with me. This morning, or whenever you happen to watch this, I want to preface this reflection with an important statement of understanding. I fully am aware that the writers of what we now have as the Bible were trying to tell the story of God's people, leading to Jesus and through to the call of all God's children to point back to God, that all might experience what is God's love, grace, mercy, and hope. At least that's how I would summarize what they were doing. But that's not our purpose, right? I know that that's their purpose, and therefore some of the things that we talk about in these weeks are different. My dog is coming to say hello. So I know that their purpose was not the same as ours, but it wouldn't have been, would it? First, because the society that the writers would have lived in wouldn't have had to think about the women, really. They faithfully told some of the stories, but given the patriarchal nature of the society, it would not have dawned on them to need to uplift the women's stories. And why not? Because in the way that it was meant, it was assumed that the men would care for, protect, and uplift the women in their sphere. It wouldn't need to be addressed because it just was fact and expected and accepted. It was not a let me protect the helpless, weak woman type of situation. Second, I doubt the believers of the time ever imagined a time in which women of faith would need reminders that they are equally called and valued both by God and by the faith community. Unfortunately, neither of those things are true today. Wilcox titles the reflection for the Isaiah passage today as Called in the Womb, an apt name, given that this is what Isaiah describes here, the calling God placed upon him while he was still in his mother's womb. Hold on to that image just for a moment. Matthew writes a Joseph-centered birth narrative. Yet another reason the whole of Scripture matters more than the parts, because to get the full picture, we need to read the full story. If you read only Luke, you hear Mary. If you read only Matthew, you hear Joseph. While that should seem obvious, it obviously isn't. So let's just get that out there. Here's what I mean by a Joseph-centered birth narrative. In Luke, we hear Mary's voice and Elizabeth's. We see the angel visit Mary and her acceptance of the call upon her and her womb. In Matthew, those stories aren't told. In Matthew, we hear the angels, yes, plural, messages to Joseph, navigating he and the family to Bethlehem, then to Egypt, and finally to Nazareth. And Mary? Where is Mary in Matthew? Particularly after Jesus' birth, her name is minimized, and she more often is referenced as the child and his mother. Two mothers whose wombs are called equally as the ones who grow inside them. One woman who, as far as I know, is never named, one woman who is known for carrying the child, but that's about it. Who was Mary? What was her life like after Jesus' birth, during their flight to Egypt, and then going to Nazareth and setting up home with this child? Years away from the circle of women who would have surrounded her as she learned what it was to be a parent to this boy named Jesus. Years away from home and family. And what was their life like in Egypt? The Moses years or the Joseph years? The early Joseph years or the later Joseph years? And what about Isaiah's mom? What was her life like? I can't imagine realizing your son was called to be a prophet was an exciting realization. As a mom, I'm guessing it was more daunting and fear-inducing knowing how prophets tended to be received. Two mothers whose wombs are called equally as the ones growing inside them. God created the world and everything in it. If we accept that as truth, then we need to acknowledge that Jesus could have chosen to enter this world in any other way. Yet Jesus chose to be born of a woman. Why? The common argument as the answer to that question is that Jesus' time in the womb and his human birth were meant as reminders that God truly does understand what it is to be human and to endure all the trials of life and of faith that come with living in this world. I'm not discounting that. I'm not saying that that's wrong. But could it also be because God foresaw what religion would do to women? Could it be that God longed for women to have a reminder of their equal love and worth? I don't think we can count that out as a possibility. Mary is highlighted for a week, maybe 2 every year. And that's it. By the time Christmas is done, she is all but forgotten. Joseph's dreams and Joseph's carpentry are discussed. But even through Jesus' childhood, we don't hear much about her. She would have been prominent in Jesus' life, right? We just don't have much of his childhood given to us. Our challenge, the purpose of these 37 and counting weeks, is to hold on to the truths revealed by God through women like Mary and Elizabeth and Isaiah's mom. To not allow ourselves to forget, to not allow ourselves to be convinced to take a back seat, to not allow ourselves to be silenced, to not allow ourselves to back down from our calling. Because make no mistake, she is called. So let's get speaking. Thank you for being here. I will see you next week for the second Sunday of Christmas. Be well.